This is brachot, daf chaf aleph amud aleph, towards the bottom, about 3 lines before it gets wide, and we're starting sort of in the middle of the topic, but let's conclude this topic and move on. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Safek kara kriyat shema, Safek lo kara chozer v'korei kriyat shema. If someone is not sure if he said shema or not, he should repeat shema. Presumably the reason is because shema is assumed to be a mitzvah d'oraita. Safek d'oraita l'chorma was strict in cases of doubt with d'oraita. Safek hispalel, safek lo hispalel. If someone's in doubt about whether he said tefillah, which is shmon esrei, eino chozer u'mispalel, he does not repeat the shmon esrei. Presumably here is because safek d'Rabbanan l'kula, the obligation to say shmon esrei is midrabbanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Ulavai sheyispalel adam kol hayom kulo. Rabbi Yochanan says halavai, if only a person would daven all day long. Rabbi Yochanan thinks it's an ideal, or maybe a theoretical ideal, to daven for the entire day, to keep saying shmon esrei all day. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that you should repeat shmon esrei because there's no downside. Even if you davened already, it's a good thing to daven again. So you should be strict and daven shmon esrei again if you're not sure if you even davened. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Haya omeid b'tefila v'niskar sheis palel. If a person is davening and remembers that he davened already, post sake he should stop his davening v'afilu be'emtza bracha. He should stop his second shmon esrei, even if it's the middle of a bracha of shmon esrei. Stop right where you're up to when you realize it, and stop saying shmon esrei, because you can't daven the second shmon esrei. This seems to completely contradict Rabbi Yochanan, saying you can't daven another shmon esrei, and if you did, you should stop in the middle. Eini, the Gemara asks, this is not so. V'ha'amar Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman told us, Ki avinan bei Rabba bar Avua, when we were in the house of Rabba bar Avua, Ba'an minei, they asked of him, Hani bnei bei Rav, did ta'u umadkere d'chol b'Shabbos. Some students who made a mistake, and they said the shmon esrei of chol on Shabbos. By mistake, instead of going to the Shabbos section after Akel Kadosh and saying Yismach Moshe, or each davening is different, but instead you go into your routine of the weekday shmon esrei and you say Atachonein Ladam Da'an, and you continue with the weekday shmon esrei. Mahu sheyigmeru. What's the halacha? Should you finish that bracha when you realize that in the middle of the bracha that you're saying the wrong bracha? The Amar Lan, and Rabbah said, Gomer kol osa bracha. Rabbah said, first finish the bracha you're up to, and then go back to the Shabbos section. So we see that if you are davening a shmon esrei by mistake, you shouldn't stop in the middle of the bracha, but you should finish the bracha. However, Shmuel said that if you're davening shmon esrei and you realize that you've davened already, you should stop even in the middle of the bracha. Here it's gomer kol osa bracha, and the assumption is that Shmuel would have followed the opinion of Rabbah. Hachi hashta, the Gemara says, this is not a comparison. Hatam, in the case over there of Rabbah, Gavra bar chiyuvahu, the person who said the weekday shmon esrei on Shabbos is a bar chiyuva, is someone who's obligated in the shmon esrei of chol, meaning even though it's Shabbos, you're really obligated to say a full shmon esrei. What we should have done on Shabbos is said the regular weekday shmon esrei full and added ritzei, like a yalav yavo or ritzei, to recognize that it's Shabbos. Instead, we add Shabbos but erase the entire middle section of shmon esrei. But really, you're obligated to say it. For Rabbanan hu delo atzruchuhu, and the Chachamim just wanted to be lenient with us, to not trouble us to say the whole shmon esrei, mishum kavod Shabbos, because it would detract from kavod Shabbos. So therefore, if you make a mistake, it makes sense you should finish the bracha at least. Aval hacha, but here, in the case of Shmuel, where the person davened already, Hatzalile, he already completely davened, and therefore should stop in the middle of the Shemona Esrei. Vi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, His palil v'nichnas beis hakneses. If a person davened and he went into the beis hakneses, meaning he davened already previously, and then he goes to shul, walks into the shul, umatza tzibur shem ispalim, and he finds that there's a tzibur davening. Im yachol l'chadesh ba'davar yachshov yispalel. If he has something new to add to his Shemona Esrei, like to ask for something new that he didn't ask the first time, then he should daven again with the tzibur and have an extra Shemona Esrei. V'imlav, but if he has nothing to add, al yachzor v'yispalel, he should not repeat his Shemona Esrei. So here Shmuel, what Shmuel says, is rather consistent with his previous statement, that Shmuel says that you can't add an extra Shemona Esrei of the same. Here he adds that you could if you make a chiddush, but absent a chiddush, you can't repeat a Shemona Esrei an extra time. Utzricha, and the Gemara analyzes and says they're both necessary. Both statements of Shmuel are necessary to be taught. Di'i ashma inon kamaita, because if we would have had only the first statement, Hani Mili, I would have thought to limit it to a case of Yachid v'Yachid, of where he first davened b'Yechidus with himself, and then he's davening again b'Yechidus. So in that case, he shouldn't repeat the Shemona Esrei. Or, tzibur v'tzibur, or I would limit it in a parallel to sono daven with a tzibur, and then is davening again with a tzibur. In those cases, I would say, I understand Shmuel's halacha that you can't repeat a Shemona Esrei. Aval yachid legabe tzibur, but if it's a case of a yachid relative to a tzibur, where first you daven alone and then you're in shul, I would think Kiman delot salidami, that it's as if you didn't daven. It's as if you didn't daven, and therefore, meaning you didn't daven tefillah b'tzibur. You davened, but you didn't do tefillah b'tzibur. So relative to tefillah b'tzibur, you didn't daven, and I would think that in this case you should daven with the tzibur. Kamash Malan, therefore Shmuel's second statement teaches us that even if you're adding the advantage of tefillah b'tzibur, you shouldn't repeat the Shemona Esrei. So therefore we need the second statement of Shmuel. And if you only had the second statement of Shmuel, Mishum de lo aschil ba, that is because you didn't start davening. The second halacha is saying that you shouldn't start davening. But there in the first case, the aschil ba, if I didn't have the first halacha, I would have thought that in the case where you already started, ema lo, I would think it's not true, and that you should continue to finish the bracha, tzricha. And therefore, concludes the Gemara, it was necessary to teach us both statements of Shmuel, that Shmuel believes that you should never daven a second Shemona Esrei, even if you're adding tefillah b'tzibur, and even if you started davening already.